Go to Kerri Kupec Urbahn. She's our Fox News legal editor and former counselor to Attorney General Bill Barr. You've been inside the courtroom all morning. You can bring us some of the color. At some points, this looked more like a WWE event than it did a courtroom proceeding.
You know, in this last hour, the former president was pretty composed, restrained for him, but towards the end, he was getting angry and building upon what Nate Foy reported and what Andy McCarthy was saying. He was talking about how the fraud is not, he says the fraud is not on his end, but it's on the court's end. And you know, John, I was thinking about it as I was sitting there watching him, and I was thinking, imagine a small town where the speed limit is 55 miles an hour, and everyone goes 65 miles an hour. And it's always been that way. And no one's ever been pulled over, no one's ever been arrested. But then a new sheriff comes to town and says, you know what, I don't like that John Doe guy over there. And I'm gonna start enforcing the law specifically against him. And not only that, I'm going to make sure that he doesn't speed now. I'm going to make sure that he and his family can't ever drive again. And I think that's probably what the former president was feeling and thinking as he was sitting there, because as has been mentioned, our research team, which includes lawyers, cannot find any example in New York State of someone being convicted of inflating real estate values without a victim. And that's what we have right here.
Yeah, and Kerri, what we've really heard is a lot of the former president defending his children and the attacks on them. But the president at one point saying, quote, in the courtroom, I'm worth billions of dollars more than these financial statements. He told a state lawyer, you go around and try and demean me and try to hurt me, probably for political reasons. Obviously, emotions are running high at various points in this trial.
And it does raise the question of how does one determine value when you're talking about a celebrity turned president? So, for instance, I was thinking, and I looked it up while I was sitting there, I was thinking about Judy Garland's slippers in The Wizard of Oz, those red ruby slippers that everyone knows what they are. And I think ordinarily, if they hadn't been on Judy Garland's feet, they'd be what, maybe a couple $100? They're currently valued at $3.5 million. So I think it gets tricky when it comes to valuing a property, say as Mar-a-Lago or his golf course in Scotland. And I think that's the point he was trying to make. He was saying, I didn't incorporate brand. I didn't put brand down on the paper, but brand is a thing. And I also thought a point that he made that was compelling was that on page 1 of these financial statement of conditions, there's a disclaimer. And that disclaimer says that, yes, look, this is our position. This is what we think our property is valued, but you have to do your due diligence. You have to go out there and make sure that we're right. And if it's not, and if you don't, that's on you. And that was the point he kept coming back to.
You know, I love the rich metaphors that you're giving us today. Small town speeding, Judy Garland's ruby red slippers.
I was thinking a lot in the courtroom, John.
Clearly you were. I love the way it's great pop culture references here. People at home understand those. But what they may not understand are real estate values. I mean, the bottom line is any piece of property or any piece of personal property, hence the Judy Garland slippers, are worth what anybody is willing to pay for them. And when it comes to celebrity property, whether it's personal or whether it's real estate, that number can be anything that somebody wants to say it is. Now, the judge said that Mar-a-Lago was worth $18 million, which, I'm sorry, in terms of Palm Beach real estate, that's laughable. Trump bought it in 1986, I think it was, for $7 million. The Post family wanted $22 million for it at the time. Trump got the deal of a century on that. But to say Mar-a-Lago is only worth $18 million, I don't know that it's worth $1 billion. That's probably a stretch. But, you know, it's probably worth more than $100 million easily, I would think, Kerri.
Yeah, and, you know, talking about a property with 100+ rooms on the ocean, the pool, I don't think it even has to be in Palm Beach for anyone to look at that and say 18 million, that seems a little low. And those, again, those were the 2 points that the former president kept coming back to defend himself. He said, if anything, I undervalued my properties. And number 2, there was a disclaimer, everything that we disclosed. And he said, interestingly, that the disclosure, this financial statement of condition, that in the business world, they're considered worthless. Now, I'm not a business person, this is what he says, but he says that ordinarily, it's a par for the course, perfunctory process aspect that holds up in court normally. And again, it's on the banks to decide whether they agree with that statement or not before they go forward with lending money and the like.
Kerri, can you tell us a little bit about the moment when the former president's lawyer was asked, quote, can you control your client? This is not a political rally. This is a courtroom. said the judge. The president's lawyer responded, who has had, as we already know, clashes with this judge, responded that the former president, was entitled to latitude as a former president and current candidate, taking time away from the campaign to be on the witness stand. What was that exchange like?
It was testy. It was testy. And I will say that things calmed down a bit in the second hour. But, you know, one of the points that Trump's lawyers have been making is that if the state wants to ask certain questions, of course they can ask those questions, but Trump's not a lawyer, and some answers obviously require lengthy responses and context and the like. That's not to say that the former president hasn't gone off on some tangents about China and Russia and the like, as we all have come to know him to do quite well over the last number of years. But other than those occasional tangents, the former president has pretty much stuck to answering the questions, occasionally, though, complaining about political persecution. And I will say the judge has allowed him to directly attack both him, the judge, and also the attorney general, who's sitting there in the front row, as mentioned earlier.
You know, Kerri, when we've gotten together here on the set in D.C. a number of times, we've talked about the Biden case, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, and you speak about the Delaware way, this kind of cozy relationship that all of the folks in Delaware have with each other, legal, business, or otherwise. But Andy McCarthy's talking about the New York way, particularly as it pertains to this case, where you've got an elected attorney general and you've got an elected judge, and you've got, again, as you pointed out, a very unique prosecution, because this has never happened before. Is this a legal proceeding or is this a political proceeding?
I think a lot of the facts point to the fact that there's a heavy dose of politics intertwined in all of this. Just the fact that the Attorney General campaigned on going after Donald Trump, not only is that unusual, I would say that it's highly inappropriate. It's the job of the Attorney General and judges and the justice system to maintain a semblance of neutrality. Right? People depend on that, not just Donald Trump, but everybody. That our system of justice depends on the even-handed, neutral application of the law without regard to partisan politics. And, you know, one thing I often talk about is that justice is both letter and spirit. So here the judge has found that the former president committed fraud. Okay, that's the letter of the law. That's what's on the books. But the spirit of the law asks what is fair. And how one can discern what is fair is asking, how has the law been applied in similar situations? And here, there isn't one. And two, does the punishment fit the crime, especially when the law has never been applied in that way? And that is a way to determine whether justice is actually being had when both the letter and the spirit are combined. And I'm concerned, John and Sandra, that in this particular case, we're seeing a divorcing of those two, which at the end of the day is not actually justice.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.